Hi, and welcome to Engage with Equal Forum, a podcast to encourage the modern day woman and her vital role in shaping society. I'm one of your hosts, Glenn McKay, a former executive director and current board member of Eagle Forum, and I'm joined by Eagle Forum's political director, Tabitha Walter.
Hi.
And Eagle Forum's executive director, Kirsten Hassler.
Thank you, Glenn. It's great to be here with you. We have a very unique episode for you guys today. On our podcast, we usually tackle the most current issues that affect families, and they're usually political in nature. We thought we would give you guys a little bit of a break to soak in over 6 months worth of information and introduce ourselves to our new subscribers.
So the three of us are always talking to each other, not only about the podcast, but about life too. We really lean on each other. I've likened us to a sisterhood before. Of course, I'm the only one without a sister, so it may feel a little different for me, but I really enjoyed the camaraderie we have going on. So we are going to let you eavesdrop on our conversation today. We hope that you can find some camaraderie with us today, or at the very least, some humor. So let's start at the very beginning. What did you want to be when you grew up, and how did you become in the political world? Kirsten, let's start with you.
Oh, okay. Of course, I have to be the first one. Let me see here. So in 7th grade, I had to write a report about this, and I chose a political scientist because I was always been a big political nerd. In 7th grade, my parents brought me to a George Bush rally.
Oh, wow.
When he was campaigning. So I don't know, I guess it's like always been a drive for me. I just have always loved watching the news and reading information, learning about our country. And then when I was in college, I studied economics, and I was like, that kind of, the political wave had kind of left me. But then I ended up getting a first job, and then I was like, okay, this is definitely what I want to do. And I don't know, that's kind of how I got involved in it.
Did you look for a job in politics, or that's just what came up for you to do?
The doors were closing for me. And then all of a sudden, the day I graduated, I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm moving back to Wisconsin. So I had just gotten ready. Like before I was going to go walk, I was still in my room in my sorority house, and I went and looked up on my computer. I was like, jobs in Governor Scott Walker's office. And I applied for something, and I heard back. So It was a total God thing.
Yeah. Funny how he does that, right?
Yes.
What about you, Glenn?
Yeah, that's kind of a lot of my story too. Growing up, I wanted to be a mom. Then I was going to be a teacher. And then by the time it really, there's a lot of pressure in high school, I think these days, to make your plan. And I decided I would be a lawyer. And I don't know, I think that came a lot from I've always had this, I'm a firstborn, very type A, and this kind of keen sense of, or need for justice and law and order. And so that just kind of made sense to me. And I also thought that choosing a career like that would bring about a good work-life balance. So that was my 10-year plan. And then, kind of like Kirsten talked about, God just intervened. Thank him for that. But I graduated a semester early from Baylor, and President Obama had just been elected. And it was really interesting to watch and amazing to see the first Black man elected president of the United States. But also, I just had so many questions and was wondering how a man who had been, raised in this communist Marxist ideology could be elected president. And I just started searching for answers. And so I had this extra semester. I ended up applying for an internship with Phyllis Schlafly. She had greatly influenced my grandmother, and my grandmother had been an activist within Eagle Forum for decades. So I thought, well, that's somebody I can trust to mentor and, lead me through this. And then the rest is history. Took the internship with her, ended up working on a congressional campaign after the internship. And then she had a job in DC that took me to DC. And here we are, actually 10 years later. So,
Glenn, I have to admit that I always thought you were kind of like an enigma. Like I would see you at meetings, and you just seem so like bold and confident. And I'm like, I want to be that. So
I think it really I knew I was different when I got to DC. As soon as I started meeting people, I moved there knowing vaguely one person who had gone to Baylor with me. I ended up living with her. That was a whole nother God thing. But, just starting to meet people, people go there a lot of times for a career. And I was just so driven by principle and ideas and wanting to make a difference. And so that probably kept me from keeping my mouth shut when I should have. And, that kind of thing. I just didn't have I wasn't scared of that. And anyway, it's an interesting to look back on, but
Yeah.
I think I appreciate you saying that.
No, it's a compliment for real. As far as me, my parents were pretty apolitical. We didn't have conversations about politics or anything like that. And they weren't avoiding it. It just wasn't part of their lives. So when Bill Clinton was in the news constantly, and I was old enough to realize like there's something going on, Nickelodeon had done a little like mock voting thing where we could call in, and I wanted to do that. And so I did that, and then we did a mock voting thing at in my 4th grade classroom, and I was the only one who wouldn't vote for Bill Clinton. And my teacher asked why, and I had all these reasons. I can't remember what they were now, but I was pretty dead against voting for him. And then fast forward to 6th grade, I did a social studies fair project on the perjury of Bill Clinton. And so, and that's when, that's obviously like when the Monica Lewinsky scandal was pretty popular. And so that fared well for me for a couple rounds, and then I got to the state level, and one of the judges did not agree with me, and I lost at the state level, but that like only fueled my desire. But at the time, it was just like a side thing. I really wanted to be a teacher, an elementary school teacher, so got my bachelor's degree.
The only girl who didn't want to be a teacher growing up.
Right. Well, I was born and raised in the country, so my career choices were kind of slim pickings. And
but also, don't you think, because that's something that I think the feminists say a lot, is like, we want a world where women can't just be nurses or teachers, but don't you think women choose to be teachers because not only are they like helping foster and grow the next generation, but it presents a lot of flexibility?
Oh, absolutely. And like, I love kids. Like, I worked with kids at church, and I babysat a lot, so I just really love doing that. But then like when I got into the school system for student teaching, I was like, this is not what I thought. You can be creative. People were really unhappy with their jobs. And we've seen a lot of that tension play out over the years, but I just didn't want to enter something where people were already unhappy. And so I didn't plan on getting my master's degree at the time, but my mom was like, you need to go up to that office. It was the first day of classes, and you need to sign up for a master's degree. And I was like, okay. So the only program that I had the prereqs for was political science. And so I just went ahead and got a master's degree in political science, did an internship at the West Virginia State Capitol. Wow. And that's where I fell in love with this whole process. Also fell in love with my husband, but we'll talk about that later. And so it was just, I just loved all of the drama and the chaos and figuring out like how life worked, like how our nation worked, how our state level worked. And so God definitely planted that seed in me.
I love that.
Yeah. So kind of moving on along that same vein, where do you both identify politically? And you can go first, Glenn.
So this is an interesting question, and one that my husband and I have been talking about a lot lately, because I get all feisty when people are asked that question and they immediately respond with a party, because I feel like you can't ascribe yourself to a certain party anymore in answer to what are your, political views, because it's so, it's very complex. So I have always defined myself as a conservative, and I used to call myself a conservative Republican. I still call myself a conservative Republican sometimes, but I lead with conservative because it's an ideology that I've ascribed to. And I think that comes from, I was thinking a lot about that, because I want to hear from y'all too, what led you to that decision. But for me, so much of it came from my parents, from my dad especially. And I was encouraged to be educated on politics from a young age. And my parents were faithful voters. They would never tell you who they voted for, but they were faithful voters and always had paid attention to the news. So we were always talking about those kinds of things. And I really just, in the wake of losing my dad, been reflecting on all the things I learned from him. And I think so much of my desire for honesty and transparency and just really working things out for yourself came from him, because he came from a traditionally Democrat background, but then grew to live and vote as a conservative, which means he traditionally voted and supported Republicans. So why, how does that happen? Because it doesn't seem to be, I don't see that as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I think so much, he read a lot, he studied a lot, he just worked things out in his mind and expected us to do the same. He worked hard for everything he had, which is actually something that he learned from his parents, from his family. I mean, they didn't come from affluence or wealth, but they did what they had to do to provide for their family. And my dad saw that, and my dad modeled that. He was the first one to go to college. And, that was then expected from us. So I don't take any of that for granted, because I'm reaping the benefits of the faithfulness of my grandparents and of my dad. But I think the point in all of that was that he worked issues out in his mind. He took an issue, he read about it, he studied about it, he learned, he sought wise counsel, and then he came to a conclusion. And all of those conclusions led him to the polls and how he voted. So anyway, sorry, I think I got on a soapbox there too, but that's really how I identify my political views and kind of what led me to that.
No, I love that. Yeah.
And just for full disclosure for our listeners, we have not seen each other's answers. And so we're having like a real conversation here, but we may all have the same answer, we may not.
Yeah.
Glenn, I'm of the same thread here, where I identify myself as a conservative, but I think it's just my way of like distancing myself from the Republican Party. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still vote Republican probably most of the time, but there are times that I don't agree with the way that Republicans vote. Yeah. We have a great platform, and the platform is what I agree with. Right. But when you have a group of conservatives, say in Congress, who are voting for something that I feel like doesn't represent me, then I don't want to be aligned with the Republican Party. Right. So, like, for instance, all of the financial bills that keep rolling down the pike.
Yes.
How can we be fiscally conservative when we're continually adding more money to the deficit, and we're putting money into places that don't need the money? So that's where I kind of divert from the Republican Party that is today, at least. And then as far as how I came to this conclusion, it also boils down to my upbringing. So I'm from West Virginia, like I mentioned before, where the general population is socially conservative, even for many Democrats, at least while I was growing up. And but the major divisions were typically on like unions and government intervention. And both of these things, in my view, were extremely unhelpful, which aligned me more with the conservative thought. And then when I started working in DC, then I started learning a lot of that substance behind what I believed. So like the science behind being pro-life, or how the federal government can really handcuff people and organizations by creating funding programs where they're stuck, like they can't get out of that federal funding, or they completely lose their organization, or they lose the funding that they need to survive. And so that entrapment really turned me off of big government. Yeah. And then, of course, like my passion behind these things really ramped up whenever I had a kid, because now I'm not fighting for myself anymore. I'm fighting for future generations. That's right. And I would consider my life being great so far, but I would love for my kid to have an even better life than I have. And so when you bring other people into the mix, especially the ones that you love the most, you want to fight for their future.
That's right.
Yeah, I would probably pretty much echo everything that y'all said. I mean, I was raised in a conservative home. I mean, and I think like some people would look at my life and say, well, you weren't exposed to varying of opinions. But the one thing about my parents and about the college education I received is that both of those entities really instilled in me the need to know why you believe what you do and have a solid defense for it, but then also have a breadth of knowledge about the other opinions in the world and why you may or may not be opposed to them.
Right.
And then taking all of that and formulating your own decisions. So yes, of course, I identify as a conservative as well. I mean, thankfully, my dad was always in one with the Republican Party, so I like always kind of had that streak in me. It's like, I think like one thing that we know from being outside of Washington is that it's hard to trust the system when you don't understand everything that's going on in there. Mm-hmm. When you are working in DC, and especially when I worked in Capitol Hill, in the House of Representatives, I really got an inside look at all the political moves that have to be made in these decision making that leads to the fruition of a bill and then ultimately into a passage of it. And so a lot of like the ideals that we hold, just sadly, they're never going to come into fruition because there's all these different political maneuvers that are happening behind the scenes. And so, I mean, yes, I've been totally disillusioned by living in DC, but I think like because we have that institutional knowledge, it does give me a little bit more of a, I don't know, I'd say like a step up in like actual tangible things that we can fight for, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think this is all like the very reason we started this podcast, right? Because we have been able to take these ideas, work them out for ourselves, understand why we believe them, understand why other people believe other things. And we know that's hard and that's a process. And I know everybody doesn't have time to do that. And so I don't know, I think you would agree, like that's what I'm most passionate about, is making sure that other people are equipped and empowered to take part in this process, because like you've both said, you know, it is so convoluted and it's all political maneuvering, everything is politics. And so you have to be able to take all of that and filter through it to come to the conclusions, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think like it's also like so important to remember the little wins that we have. You know, it's easy to get frustrated, like Tabitha, you were saying, like the crazy spending that the government does. But like we also have had a ton of wins in the life movement for the past four or so years. You know, little steps, baby steps that like, oh my gosh, maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know.
Yeah. We've all effectively outed ourselves as conservatives now. And I say that because conservatism isn't the most popular ideology. I mean, I find myself a lot, especially now that I've moved out of DC, kind of back into the real world. When politics is talked about, or when people are asking questions, I kind of cringe a little bit and saying, well, you know, I'm a conservative. So first of all, I would be interested in your thoughts on why that is, and then what motivates each of you to continue this work.
I mean, honestly, I still shy away from political conversations. I have friends that are all over the political spectrum, and I want to keep them close. Like, I don't want to push them away, or I don't want my personal beliefs to kind of mar the whole movement that I'm part of. But at the same time, it's just very hard it's very hard to do this work on a mental level as well. And so how I still struggle, like how do I separate my job versus my personal life? Because it all like intertwines when you work this job. Right. So yeah, it's a very difficult career path to be in politics. But I think at the same time, what motivates me is what we've talked about before, is how do we prepare a better future for the people we love the most, and also people who haven't quite yet understood what's best for our nation, or what's best for individuals. And not saying that I know what's best, but we have to start that conversation, right? And so yeah, that's a hard one, even though I wrote the question. I thought I'd have a better answer whenever I answered it, but yeah,
I think you're right. And it goes back to, right, the conversation has become so polarizing.
Yeah.
And people automatically make assumptions about you instead of, we just can't have conversations anymore. And that's very frustrating.
Yeah. No, I've had friends saying, like, when they found out who I worked for in the past, they're like, what's up with this? And and by the way, like, just because you work for an organization doesn't mean that you subscribe to every single thing that they put out. I would hope that you would agree mostly with them so that you can be effective. But just like in any other relationship, you're having internal conversations all the time about what should we message on. And sometimes your opinion gets sacrificed for a different opinion. And so it's not like because we're part of an organization, it's easy for us. We still have to have very hard conversations with each other. And then we have to go out and have hard conversations with our families and friends at the same time. So we get the double whammy from both ends of the stick.
What about you, Kristen?
I mean, I would just say, like, I honestly, this is probably a flaw in my personality, but I don't care if people think different of me because I'm a conservative. Like, I literally could care less. And that's just part of who I am. Like, I really, like, I can be really, like, put up the stone cold wall. Like, if you think of me what you want, I don't care. I've just learned to embrace it. And I haven't had anyone tell me, like, oh, well, I don't like you anymore because, you know, you're pro-life or you're whatever. I mean, and I think if someone was to come to me and say that, say, you know, like we've been saying all along, just because I identify as conservative doesn't mean I necessarily agree with every single thing that President Trump has done. I don't. But the motivating like issue for me is that I'm a single issue voter when it comes to the life issue. And the issue that I have been encountering is that, well, that extends over more than just, you know, unborn, preborn babies. There's a lot of different other factors relating to that right now. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that's a continued motivation, is that I'm hoping that there's going to be some sort of political realignment, that both parties, you know, maybe we can come together on some of these issues and really realize that, like, being pro-life means, we've talked about this before on other episodes, but being pro-abundant life, and that it reaches all different facets and levels of society. And I think that even Democrats could agree with that, you know, with conservatives. So that is a huge motivation for me.
And that's a really good point. You know, this is something, especially as we've watched the Black Lives Matter movement unfold, and the coronavirus tension on how we, you know, what governments should be doing, etc. We all want the same things, right? We just have different ways of going about that. And the only way to, like, figure that out is to have conversations. But when people immediately say, like, oh, we shouldn't talk about religion or politics, well, if those are, like, two of the primary motivating factors for all these things, like, we have to talk about them if we want to see solutions, I guess is what I'm saying. So yeah, I hear y'all. It does. I admire, and I can't wait to hear about your personality traits, Kirsten, but your ability to say, like, I am who I am and this is what I believe, and you can either take it or leave it. It's a good quality. It's not necessarily a character flaw.
Right.
Appreciate that.
But I do love this question, Tabitha. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, oh, I don't even know what to answer, you know, how to answer this. But I think it really comes back to freedom. Because, and I think that's what you both mean as well when we're talking about our children. But, you know, I believe that the tenets of conservatism are what bring about the most opportunity for success and achievement, and fulfillment for everyone, no matter where you come from, or, you know, what your socioeconomic status is, your background. Like, the principles of conservatism lead to, opportunity for everyone. But that's greatly rooted in my faith. And I think that the truth of humanity, as told through the story of the Bible, is not only one of redemption, but of freedom. And like Kristen said, you know, Jesus didn't come to give us life, but abundant life. And he came to set us free. And so if I believe that that's the foundation on which I stand, that has to translate to my politics.
Absolutely. So one of the things I think that we all have in common is that we're problem solvers. And that's one of the things that motivates us to continue working the jobs that we do because we want to solve all the problems.
Yeah.
So that goes into our next question. Let's talk about our personalities and what results we've gotten on certain personality tests. Now, like, there are a million out there, but I just want to focus on 2 today, the Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram. So what are your results and how do they relate to your life? Kirsten, let's start with you.
Okay, well, I will tell you my Enneagram first, and then I'll say, then that will relate into my Myers-Briggs. Okay. So I've never done the real Enneagram test, like the full one that you pay for. I haven't done that, but I've done a lot of like the online ones, and it always tells me I'm a 5. And when I read what a 5 is, which I can't even think of what it's called right now, like the thinker or something. I don't know. But it basically,
I know so many of our listeners are like, how do they not know what the
well, that's the thing about me is I don't really care about those. You know, like but anyways, like a 5 is someone who's like very independent,
investigator.
Yeah, the investigator. So I'm very inward thinking. And then I'll just go like do something. But like when people ask me a ton of questions about what I'm doing, I get annoyed, which is yeah, it's I don't know.
Good thing to note.
Yeah, noted.
Yeah, good thing to note. No, like I think like, and I value like my quiet time. That's how I recharge. I do like being around people, but like it always gets to a point for me where I'm like, okay, I want to go home. Like I have like really enjoyed quarantine to an extent. But I will say I have gotten a little sick of being having so much togetherness with my husband. And he's he's the exact opposite of me. He's like needs people. The different personalities are funny. So that being said, like I have no idea what my Myers-Briggs is. It's something with an I, an introvert, MJ. But and like the like types of you know how they always give like you the careers that you'd be good with after you're done with it. I always got like an administrator, and I'm really good at being an administrator. Like I was an executive assistant for almost, I don't know, like 4.5 years, because I take a lot of value in helping people accomplish things.
Well, this is actually hysterical because when you said, I don't even know what my Myers-Briggs is, I'm like, well, I kind of know mine because I looked it up before this, because I am an achiever and I want to meet the expectations that were set of me. So I went, it was like looking and trying to remember because I haven't taken Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
A long
Myers-Briggs is kind of like, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but I do know I'm an extrovert. I think I'm an ENFJ. I know I'm a J, and I think I'm an N and an F. But anyway, what my husband and I have been talking more about is the Enneagram, and I'm a 3, an achiever, but I wing 2 as a helper. My husband tells me I can only have 1 wing, but I actually think I wing 8 as well. So he says that means I'm either an unhealthy 3 or I'm an unhealthy 8. So I don't know what I am right now.
What is the 8 again?
The challenger. Okay. So he said that is because he said, I like arguments. And I'm like, no, I do not like arguments. In fact, I hate controversy. And I'd be really interested for like Phyllis to take the Enneagram test now, because she was so not a controversial individual in her personal life. It did not feel like she was not willing to take on personal battles, especially when you're running it. We saw that because she ran an organization of women. But she would get out in the news, get on the platform, on the stage, and man, she seemed like a really controversial, challenging figure. So it's really interesting. And I kind of ascribe to the same idea. When I believe something and I know something, or when I'm trying to figure something out, I definitely challenge things. But I don't know. I also think my wing 2 goes back to like how I've grown in my faith, because the 2's the helper. And I find so much fulfillment in helping others, but I don't naturally, I don't know that I naturally respond in that way. It's something I've really taught myself to do, or allowed the spirit to guide me in. I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel like you're the personality expert. So
I'm not the expert. I follow Enneagram Instagram accounts. So if that makes me an expert, then sure.
Anything makes you an expert today, right?
Yeah,
exactly. Enneagram and coffee, isn't that the popular one on
Yes,
Instagram?
that's a good one. So Glenn, you and I have the same personalities.
It's funny because a lot of times we'll text and be like, Are we the same person? That's weird.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
So yes, I am an ENFJ, which sometimes I've taken the test and the F and the T have like interchanged.
Yes.
I feel like right now it's more of an F, which is feeling. But that would be the protagonist. But if I'm feeling more of a T, then that's the commander. I do like to make decisions, so I have no problem like telling my husband where I want to go eat. And then Enneagram, I'm a 3 wing 2. So I love to accomplish things, but I don't like to crush people in the process. So I think that's where the helper comes in. And a lot of times, like, there's the 3 of us making decisions, and sometimes I take a little bit of a step back, and I like to hear what Kirsten's opinion is, and then what Glenn's opinion is, and then how can I like insert myself in the middle and come to a compromise.
Yes.
There you go.
Oh, that's funny. And even like yesterday, you were both saying something, and I was like, how do I bring this to a
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah,
and
the last thing I want in our relationship are like 2 people ganging up on one person. So always like mentally aware of that.
Yeah.
I think as we work through this, like, it's really working together on this project, it's really made me understand the value of these personality type tests within the workplace even more. Especially when we talk about like the whole being of a person, you really need to enjoy what you're doing and be good at it. It'd be a good fit for your personality to find true fulfillment. And if you can't find the fulfillment, then you're not going to find success in your job. I don't know. I can appreciate, and I'm very intrigued by these personality tests.
Well, I think it's interesting. Like, you could probably see our personality breakdown in the aspects of what we each do for the podcast. Like, Tabitha, you're like the tech person, like, like the overall, like, we wouldn't be here without you editing and, doing all that stuff.
This is how our message gets to people.
Yes.
Yeah, and just to butt in, like, that is not my background whatsoever. And I talked to my husband about it. I was like, why am I doing all this video stuff, which I love to do and I love being creative, but it just wasn't in my wheelhouse before. And he was like, that's because you sit down and you do it and you figure out a way to get it done. And I think that plays into my achiever personality, is that I will spend hours on something figuring out how to get it done. And it's very rare if I give up and just say I can't do that.
Yeah. And Glenn, you're like our expert, like, booker and getting super prepared for our interviews coming up. And then I don't know, I'm kind of like the helper. I pick up where I need to, right? Like, I write all the emails, and which I enjoy doing that kind of stuff. It brings me fulfillment.
Yeah, you're an excellent writer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For sure.
Well, let's kind of shift the gears a little bit, because we are all moms and wives. So we have to talk a little bit about that. So let's spill on the beans on these 2 relationships. Starting with marriage, let's talk about how we met our husbands. How has marriage surprised you, or what's the biggest lesson that you've learned so far?
So I mentioned before that my husband and I met at the West Virginia State Capitol while we were both interning in the same program. And he had invited me out, like, with all the other interns as friends, and I ignored it because I didn't want to like put myself in a situation where we would like each other, I guess. I don't know. And then a little while later, I came back around and started hanging out with him. And I told him at the beginning, I was like, I have no intentions of marrying you. This is just for fun. And yeah, look where we are now. It was one of those situations where I felt like I loved the guys that needed fixed, and because, I mean, look at us, we're problem solvers, but Tom like really had it all together. And so he had goals. He would be completely fine without me, but also like we complemented each other's personalities. I was more extroverted than him, but he also loved going on adventures. And so anyways, we dated for a year, we broke up, and then I was like, what am I doing? And so then we got back together and got engaged on the 4th of July and got married around Christmas. So we're all American like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, to the question of how has marriage surprised you? I was actually surprised at how much better our relationship grew even after having a kid. Like, I always had it in my mind, like, a kid would be so stressful that it would just wreck our relationship and we'd have to like constantly work on it, which, I mean, we're constantly working on it anyways. But
Yeah.
I find so much joy and fulfillment in watching him raise our son.
Yes.
And there's actually been a lot less disagreements on parenting than I thought. We were raised very different ways. And so I thought I would see that play out more. But I think a lot of the work that we put in ahead of time, because we waited a few years before we had children, I think all that work really did us a lot of good in creating a solid foundation and communicating about like what we wanted in life and what we truly believed in.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that has been the most surprising for me so far. And then what's the biggest lesson I've learned? Oh, communication. Going back to that communication. So my husband is a Democrat and I'm a Republican. And we joked about the
I
three
would
of
say
us.
you're conservative.
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm conservative. Thank you. So the three of us like talked a little bit about this before the podcast, and I'm like, this is the first public confession that my husband is a Democrat in our relationship, at least among like my conservative folks.
It makes you much more well-rounded.
Yes, it absolutely does. Now, like, my husband isn't like a diehard liberal. Like, we aren't completely opposite ends of the spectrum, and there are things that we can agree on. There are elements that we can find common ground. And I think that helps me when I have conversations with people. And I know like kind of the way that the other side thinks. It's not always a bad thing. And I don't always use it as ammo against the other side, like you might think. But yeah, so the lesson in that is how to have conversations that are productive, how to have disagreements. Also, like, that political issues aren't the main things that we fight about. Like, our arguments are your typical marital arguments of like who's doing this chore or who's doing it the right way or the wrong way, you know, that kind of stuff. So political arguments do not take up our time whatsoever. But it has really taught me a lot of how to speak to different kinds of people.
So I met my husband in college, just through mutual friends. I have, going back to my 5 personality, my Enneagram 5, I should say, not my 5 personality. I don't do anything until I feel like I have all the necessary information to do it with 100% success. And like, I know it's factual. So that's how I was with dating. Like, I literally did not date anyone until I met my husband, because I wasn't going to date someone who wasn't worth my time. I didn't think that he was going to be, you know, the one at the end of the aisle for me. So, I mean, and it's just funny, like growing up, like my mom and my grandma would always say like, oh yeah, like, you know, I'm not surprised that that's how you were. Just kind of how I was. I was also very shy. And I think that also contributed to like why I didn't really have boyfriends, is that I was very reserved, and it was hard for me to let myself out until I met my husband, who really encouraged me, and I was able to feel confident in doing that. How has marriage surprised me? It's fun. I don't know. Like, I think that's like the biggest thing is like, life is fun when you get to be with your best friend every single day. And it's enjoyable for us. The biggest lesson, I think, once I had James, our little toddler, as I really gained a tangible sense of what it must have been like for God to send his son to this earth, and then know that he was going to be crucified. Like, I would do anything for my kid to never have him, you know, come to any sort of discourse or conflict or anything. So I think like that has been like a huge lesson for me, and it's been really, I guess it's not really marriage related also, but eye-opening. Together, I feel like my husband and I have come to that realization.
I love that. Well, for me, Richard and I met in DC. I grew up in Texas. He grew up in Mississippi. We both went to DC somewhat after college. And we met at church, and we were just friends for several years. And people would ask us along the way, like, what's going on with y'all? You know, why, or either, are y'all dating, or why are you not dating? And I just kept saying, no, this is my just friend, Richard. Like, that's it. We are just friends. He's not
Poor Richard. I'm sure he was like,
Yeah.
I think he would say the same thing. He said I was too Texas for him. So I'm just too proud
so
of the
funny.
Lone Star, you know. But no, the funny thing is we were doing a Bible study. We started reading a book together, and not together, but in a group. And it was called The Sacred Search by Gary Thomas. I recommend it to everyone, even if you're married, but especially to my single friends. But the whole premise of the book is, what if marriage isn't about who you marry, but why? And about that same time, he had invited me and our group of friends to this magical place called the Neshoba County Fair. And it's in his hometown. It's where he grew up. This is a fair that you've never like experienced before. It is
better than the Texas State Fair?
Absolutely 1000%. So I can't believe I'm talking about the Neshoba County Fair on the podcast, but here it is. So it's just this wonderful place where back in the late 1800s, people started going. It was kind of just a day or two. It was your typical kind of county fair, but then there was also political speaking and such. Long story short, now there are 600 cabins on the fairgrounds. People in town move, you know, it's a county of like, I don't know, 15 to 30,000 people. I don't know. But if you own a cabin and all your friends, you move out to the fairgrounds for a week, and it's just like a little Mayberry. It's amazing. I mean, there's horse races during the day. There's music entertainment at night. It's like a big family reunion. My husband has never missed a fair. He even lived overseas for 2 years and came back those 2 years for the fair. So it's just very important to him. And I was like, sure, I'm game. Why not experience this? Well, I ended up being the only one that booked a flight to go down to Mississippi from DC for the fair that year. This was in 2013. And I say it's magical because it really was just like sparks flew. It was bizarre. It was, you know, we could say this little fairy tale thing, but what it really was that I was, you know, in the midst of his family. I love his family so much. And it was, I don't know, it just, things just started to make sense there. I started thinking, why am I so caught up in this, that, and the other about who I want to date and not about why I want to be married? And so anyway, it just became very clear to me at that point, after being friends with him for a couple, almost 3 years, that our hearts were aligned in what we wanted and what we wanted to pursue. And so we were both able to set aside the other things to anyway start dating. So that's a whole long story, but we got married. He then left to go overseas for 2 years, which is absolute insanity. Sure, let's date, but then I'm going to move overseas 5,000 miles away.
So were you married and then he moved, or you started dating and then he moved?
We started dating in September and he moved in January. So that was crazy. And it was the best thing for us as well, because we learned to communicate so well, because that would be the biggest lesson I've learned, I think, in marriage as well, like Tabitha said, is communication. You know, marriage has surprised me in a lot of ways. First of all, we didn't know that I would be able to carry and have babies when we got married. So anyway, that's another story. We ended up getting pregnant in our first month of marriage. So marriage has been crazy. Not only did he get back from being overseas for 2 years, then 8 months later we got married, then, you know, we started having children. So, but I think that what surprised me most is how me, having lived on my own for so long, I was 30, almost 30 when I got married, learning, or just seeing how easy it has been to be able to just depend on him to, you know, the what cuss word for the women's movement is submission, but to be able to submit to him in so many ways because I trust him, I trust his leadership. I just didn't, I think when I think back to preparing for marriage, I knew that was going to be the hardest part of marriage for me. And it really hasn't been. And also the way that his family has become mine has been such a gift. his sister has really become one of my best friends. Shout out Molly. She listens to the podcast. But then his mom is just, she loves me as her own. She encourages me as her own. His dad is so wonderful, especially as I've like lost my dad recently. It's just been awesome to like actually become another. I just feel so much joy being a part of another family. It's such a gift. So, and my family's amazing, of course. So it's such a gift to have another family just equally as wonderful. So let's shift the conversation to talking about our babies. How about that? Motherhood is certainly not short of surprises either. So 2 questions for y'all. What has been the hardest thing for you about motherhood, and what has been the most rewarding thing about motherhood?
So this has really played out this week in my life. The hardest has been not getting my way. We're raising little kids who have their own individual personalities.
Yeah.
And I think that was really surprising to me. Even like the day that I had Jude, he felt so independent of me. Like he had been in my belly for, well, almost 8 months. I gave birth early. And he felt like a part of me. And then when he came out, I was like, oh, he's actually like an independent person. So there are times when he is learning and growing in ways that I'm trying to figure out how to help him, how to steer that personality. He's a very strong-willed little boy. He's very adventurous. He's very curious. And it's always that balance of like, how far do I let him go on his own, but also pull him back a little to help him learn how to navigate life in an appropriate way. And so I'm always trying to find that balance. And I'm always trying to keep in mind that my way may not necessarily be his way. We may have 2 different personalities. We may have similar personalities. I don't quite know yet. But I want him to have the options before him so that he can effectively navigate his own personality as well. So there's a lot of learning involved for me. Mm-hmm. And then the most rewarding thing, gosh, there's so many rewards that I could go on and on. But one of the fun things that we did this week is yesterday I took him to a park and there's a creek. And he just walked right into the creek. And okay, like I don't mind taking a dip in the creek, but I typically just don't walk right into the creek. And so so in order for me to like help him walk through the creek, I had to get in myself. So so he's definitely made me more adventurous. Like I thought I was adventurous before, but he's pulling me in ways that I never thought that I would go, just so that he can learn and experience new things.
I love that. That's good.
That's so cute. That does not surprise me at all about you, Tabitha. Just knowing you know, that he was like bold enough to go walk through that creek.
Yes, Kirsten and I have had play dates with Jude and James.
I love
it.
Mm-hmm.
Kirsten has watched me run all over the place trying to catch Jude, while James is like perfectly standing still beside his mom. So
he's very cautious. He's
Tell
a very
us about
cautious
motherhood,
firstborn. I think the hardest thing, and of course, is he's actually over here. I think like kind of like what you were saying, Tabitha. I mean, we tend to always want like these plans to come into fruition, and especially when we're working from home. And like I usually do have some help, but of course, like this afternoon I don't. But it's just like I think motherhood has really taught me to be more flexible.
Yeah.
You know, if I have to work at 10 p.m., I have to work at 10 p.m.
Right.
But I also value that work and I find fulfillment in it. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. Just because I can't like just go to bed and watch TV doesn't mean that like, you know, my life is any worse than it was. I wouldn't trade it for anything else. And so I think just like weaving James's life into my life and into my husband's life, you know, I think we're one of the first of our like friends in this area to have had a child. And I think that like sometimes like, especially before we had it, like they're like, well, that's the last we'll see of the Hasslers. Like they're not gonna go to restaurants anymore, whatever. But James has not hampered us at all. We have actively brought him to, the brewery or to the restaurant or to Jazz in the Park. So yeah, I think, but then also there's he's having a tantrum, but just ignoring that and valuing on the fun memories that we're making as a family together. Mm-hmm. The most rewarding thing has actually been very recently. James has started calling whoever he sees and he wants attention, mama and dada. And so, and I was texting about this to Robert this morning because I took him to a park early this morning, and he was wanting to play with these little kids who were also there. And he was calling them mommy, dada. and I was texting my husband. He's like, those words really mean something to James now. He's come to notice that whenever he says those two words, that someone will respond or care for him or listen to him. And I think, just realizing that whoa, we are making such an impact on him already. He just turned 2, has been really just rewarding and eye-opening.
I love that. And I love so much of what you both said. It made me think, we talked about this a couple of podcasts ago, but how our society doesn't seem to view children as a blessing anymore, but as a burden, which is horrifying. And you see that in the birth rates. The birth rates in America have plummeted. And why? And I think there's a variety of reasons, but one thing is that concept. And so I love that you just pick him up and take him with you. We did the same for our firstborn. And then we soon thereafter, surprisingly, had the blessing of a secondborn. And we just didn't, my mom said to me when I was first pregnant, you are not being born into his life. He's being born into yours, and for reason and for purpose. And so don't let a child, don't think that means you can't keep doing the things God has called you to do. And obviously there's a balance there, but anyway, I love that. And I think for myself, as I said, we entered into parenthood very quickly, right as we were learning how to be married to each other. So a lot of things have happened, and there were moves and new jobs and all of that. And so many changes. And I'll tell you, and I hate that I'm admitting this, but probably the hardest thing for me has been the opinions of others, which is ironic because I have done so many other things throughout my life with really without a care. And so I don't know what's changed about me. I should probably dive into that a little more, but I am a people pleaser in so many ways. And especially in this social media culture where, in this culture of moral relativism and, go live your truth. Somehow that's also been translated into, I think it's the irony of that movement, but my truth is also your truth. So it's just did that make sense what I just said? There's now this culture of just whatever's good for you is good for you. And that's all that matters. And I don't know, it's been really hard to find balance in all of that. So we're actually moving toward adoption right now. So I guess that was my big announcement for everyone, but we'll see who my real friends are, who's really listening to our podcast. But, and this has just been really hard because, we've spent so much time educating ourselves over the last few years. I mean, we really thought we would build our family through adoption. But we've spent a lot of time educating ourselves and so much time in thought and discussion. And over these last couple of months, so much time in prayer over this. But still, I cringe when I tell people that this is as I've been telling people, this is what we've chosen to do next. Because I'm so scared of what the response is going to be. And probably because some people's responses haven't been just overwhelmingly positive. But that's okay, because this leads to the most rewarding thing about motherhood for me is that I have really learned how to depend on the Lord in a completely new way. From what our schedule looks like to our health decisions to our family dynamics, learning how to seek him and trust him through scripture, through prayer, through wise counsel of others has been the most rewarding, because at the end of the day, pleasing and obeying him, God, the author and actual sustainer of my life, is really all that matters. And he is where I'm going to find peace anyway, not in the opinions of others. And in him is where I'm going to find my fulfillment. So I've really, these are things we were supposed to learn in junior high, but that I'm just relearning now as an older believer, that, how to kind of work those things out, I guess.
I think that's, babies teach us so much about, like I said, having faith, having just a whole new reliance, and also trusting God with our lives ultimately,
yes.
Understanding that we are stewards,
Right.
for this child is not really mine.
Yes.
You just gave him to me
Yeah.
for this season of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are cultivating a marriage, raising our kids, and then also working full time. So let's dive into that subject. First, why did you choose to work after having your kids? Do your children go to daycare while you work? And how do you juggle the work-life balance?
So this is a kind of a loaded question, Tabitha. I think for me, after I had James, I had kind of taken a break because I'd been working in the house and my boss lost. And so I was kind of at this crossroads where my husband and I lived in one of the most expensive cities in the world, Arlington, Virginia. And I had just had a baby and I didn't have a job. So we did it for like 6 months, but like, I'm not going to lie, like funds were tight. Yeah. And I always like, the reason I love, like I've said, I love working in politics and some sort of policy oriented role is because I have this really huge motivation to do good. And so I knew I wanted something that I could work from home, that I could be present in James's life as much as possible, but then also like still have this like other thing where I am getting fulfilled through, you know, that outlet. And so I had been praying about this. I knew that these jobs existed. I just like, everyone kept telling me, they're like, oh, you know, they don't really exist. It's like you work at a place and then you have a baby and they say, well, we still want to keep you on, which that just doesn't happen on Capitol Hill. And so finally I just got this random email from Tabitha one day. It was like, hey, we have this position. You want to, you know, send me your resume, whatever. And one thing led to another, but here I am today. And really Eagle Forum has given me everything that I was looking for. You know, I have an incredibly fulfilling job where I am still working in policy. It's way less stress because I'm not, you know, like my job isn't so dependent on when Congress is in session. There's always work to do. But it's not like overpowering, overburdening. Like I never feel like, there are some weeks, I should say, with Congress, we probably want to lose our, we're like, what are you guys doing? But most of the time it's great. And I also like have found other things through Eagle Forum that I didn't really like have the opportunity to expand in other roles. And one of that is really writing. Mm-hmm. So James is not in daycare, and that's mostly just because like it's so expensive here. And my husband is in ministry. So that is just, thankfully he has some flexibility that we are able to have him home with us. And then we have a babysitter who comes too, but we are able to orient our schedules around making sure that like, if the sitter isn't able to come for, you know, that afternoon or whatever, that one of us can be present with him, which has been a huge blessing. And I think for me, like juggling work-life balance, exercise has always been a huge thing for me. Like I just have always loved the independent, goal setting that I'm able to set through if it's running or whatever kind of workout. So I don't know. That's what I love to do. And it's been fun seeing James mimic me doing workouts at home that I've been doing because of quarantine. I can't go anywhere.
What about you, Glenn?
So I was really cautious to enter into a career. You know, like I said, from the beginning, I was kind of thinking, okay, you know, I want to be a mom. So what does that look like? That kind of thing. And when I went to DC, I had older women speaking into my life saying, don't forget to get married. You know, and I could see what the feminist movement had done to women in America. So I began praying for years that if the Lord was going to build me a career, that it would be one that was conducive to home life. And so that is what has happened. I mean, he's answered my prayers exceedingly abundantly more, and I'm grateful for that. But I am able to work from home and travel a little because I have a very supportive husband. And we have a nanny who happens to be my sister right now, which is amazing. But she comes 4 days a week for the day. And, you know, I go have lunch with my kids, that kind of thing. Like I try to see them throughout the day. So that's how I try to balance, you know, I'll go read my son books before he goes down for nap time, that kind of thing. So it's constantly a struggle. And that juggle is so hard. And something that I'm still trying to figure out. I do not have all the answers. You know, I wasn't sure if I was going to say this or not, but I'm going to, bearing all of my, all the things, but I just started grief counseling. And so not only did I spend the first session, working through losing my dad unexpectedly and all of that, but then I like find myself bawling over when I'm talking about my job, because I've got my job that's full time. I do the podcast and the Eagle Forum stuff in a volunteer capacity on the side. I'm also, very involved in my husband's ministry. He's in ministry as well. And so then there's the most important work, which is being a wife to him and a mom to my children. And it is so hard. So I'm just like bawling over that. And really a lot of it comes back to meeting the expectations I feel others have put on me, which is not okay. But there is a lot of stress, and it is hard, but it goes back to boundaries. What has the Lord called you to? What are you sure that you are supposed to be doing right now in this season of life? And how are you balancing that with everything else? And I'm starting to realize too, that those boundaries come into these interpersonal relationships as well, not allowing people to speak into your life in ways that contradict what God has told you, that kind of stuff. So anyway, we do a lot of things together as a family, which I feel like is that balance. I am working to develop some hobbies so that I do have some things for myself to do on the side. But right now, I lead a discipleship group and we lead our community group. And so when I have downtime, I'm either like washing the dishes, sweeping my floors, or finishing my book readings, or trying to spend time in the Word, just learning more and letting God fill my spirit in that way. So anyway, I don't know. That was
I
kind
don't
of
know how you do that all, Glenn.
answer.
No.
Well,
Superwoman.
I don't know. I have a very supportive husband, and he helps me do all these things.
Yeah.
Off on Fridays,
I think that's probably the common thread through all.
Yes,
I should have mentioned that. Like, I couldn't do any of this without Robert's help.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And not just his physical presence, but my husband's emotional and spiritual presence in my life as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I chose to start working again, one, because of finances. We live in Alexandria, Virginia, and yes, it's very expensive. And two, like, we feel like we're meant to be in the DC area. Mm-hmm. So it'd be different if we weren't attached or felt like we didn't have a purpose here, because then we could just move somewhere else that's cheaper. But we have a lot of community things that go on here. We are very tightly knit with our friends, and so we don't want to leave that, and we don't want to leave God's purpose for us either. So that means that I'm working, but also, like, I love working. Everyone told me, oh, when you after maternity leave, you're not going to want to come back to work, but I actually did, because I love working for Eagle Forum, and so we really have the perfect setup. And obviously this isn't the setup for everyone, maybe more so now since everyone's in quarantine, but I do have that flexibility, like Kirsten said, to finish a project later in the day or at a different time. And I try to find ways to pay attention to my kids' needs at that time. So if I have to stop in the middle of the project and like sit down with him and read a book or feed him a bottle or something, I can do that. And so that's really nice. And it made things a lot easier to go back to work with that in mind.
I think a key component in what both of you are saying is we have employers that value our full being as a person. And so, I worked for Eagle Forum for a while. Now I work for a political group called the Club for Growth. And my boss, literally at my reviews, the first thing he asks is this working for your family still? And so while there have been all these movements to legislate and to develop regulations and such for businesses when it comes to how they employ and hire women, I mean, the market works itself out. I found a job that is conducive to my home life. I found an employer that cares about me as a person and not just as an employee. And so that is not impossible to find.
Right. And I think it's totally acceptable to request that kind of atmosphere, even if your employer doesn't allow that, or you think that you might be met with some kind of tension. Like, advocate for that family life balance.
Yes.
And I think that could be the only way that employers learn to offer that to their employees.
You know, when they talk about the disparity between salaries between men and women, I'm not saying that exactly right, but one of the factors they found that is most influential on that wage gap is a woman's inability to go boldly and ask for a raise, or go boldly and ask for whatever they want. And so, you know, we have to keep that in mind as we're working these jobs and such. But anyway, that's another soapbox issue that I won't get on. I'll get back off of it. Sorry.
Sure. So my son does go to daycare. He goes to an in-home daycare with, I think it's 12 kids max, but they're not all there usually on the same days. And he goes 3 days a week. So my husband before quarantine, he worked from home 2 days a week, and we would trade off care during that time, like if I needed to go in for a meeting or something like that. And we've continued to let him go during quarantine just for like the social aspect. And it's been amazing. Like his caregivers treat him like he's one of their own children. He's learned a lot. And it's been a nice little community effort between all of us to give him some opportunities to get his energy out and learn more things than maybe I would expose him to. So good things, that is. And then what do I do to de-stress during this, like trying to find this work-life balance? So first, I try to be flexible. It's so easy to like zero in on a project. And so I realized that my child's needs change from day to day. Like I can't expect what yesterday looked like today. And so I have to put my expectations aside to be able to respond to him when he needs my attention. And so that means sometimes foregoing typical hours, like the 9 to 5 hours. Like that just doesn't work when you have a little one at home or you're trying to work around schedules. And so I try not to fit everything in a rigid time frame also, but just like, self-care, this probably isn't the healthiest thing, but I just binge watch TV. I love going on Netflix and seeing what the new thing is and just watching it. That's my outlet. What was a moment in your life that you felt the most empowered?
I mean, I think when you give birth, I'm just going to put that out there. Like, I remember the last, like 10 minutes of pushing, and I was just like, I cannot do this anymore, and wanting to just give up. And then all of a sudden you're done, and you did it. You're around the bend and you're holding your baby in your arms, and it is just empowering, being, bringing life into the world. And then also just like the instant connection that I felt to James, which I know like some women don't have that. And motherhood is its own struggle daily, but the ups and downs through it has been really empowering for me and fulfilling.
I was talking to my dentist one day, and she asked about childbirth because she doesn't have any children yet. And I said, it's the most empowered I've ever felt. And she was like, wow, I've never heard it put into that context. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone hears the horror stories and how it feels painful, but no one ever talks about like how empowering that is. Yeah. And so it's important that we also encourage women to give birth as well, because it feels rewarding. It feels great to do that as a woman.
I love that. No, and I absolutely would agree, but I don't want to give that cop-out answer. I was thinking of, there's so many different experiences in my life, but when I moved to DC at the end of 2010, it was early 2011, that was probably one of the most empowering moments of my life, because it was me really kind of outside of the covering of my mom and dad. I had, it was just different, graduating from college, going out there, truly being on your own, beginning to make your own decisions, and to be able to implement all that you learned and that had been taught to you in a very practical, real life way. anyway, that was a really empowering time. I didn't make all the best decisions, but I wouldn't trade anything for the world because it's made me who I am and given me the perspective that I have. So.
Mm-hmm. All right, Kirsten, what's your question?
What was the best thing about living in Washington, D.C.?
One thing that we continue to talk about in our home, because both my husband and I lived there and now we don't, is the level of authentic diversity. I mean, you've got people from all over the country, from all backgrounds, all walks of life, all views, all opinions, all parties, all religions, coming to one place to try to affect change in our country or to, affect our system of government. And so that is probably what we miss the most, is the diversity. And the way that things were always moving, it was very transient area as well, which is also a drawback, but people were always coming in and moving out, and you were exposed to so many different people and so many ideologies, and it just is such a challenging place in so many ways. And I think sometimes we miss that challenge. We love where we are now because we are in our own little Mayberry, but that is one, I think, the most positive things about our nation's capital.
Yeah, I love so many things about DC. I just love all the things to do. I mean, I'm from a little country town where you could go to the mall and you could go to the grocery store, but that's about it. And here, like, you have so many opportunities. You have you have not only every store at your fingertip, but you also can learn about the nation's history. If you're that kind of person, if you're a history person, there is a lot of music influence, like in the Shaw neighborhoods and like around Ben's Chili Bowl, and just a lot of like deep rooted history here that isn't just your typical like American history, but just how humans have lived and what they love to do, like their hobbies and what influences them, art, like we have the Kennedy Center, which I mean is sometimes embroiled in controversy when it comes to politics, but you have the opportunity to go see a Broadway or a musical or whatever. So there are endless things to do here that don't even have a political flair.
Yeah, I would just echo that stuff. I mean, I think someone before we moved here said, it's time to leave if you can no longer, drive past the Capitol or walk on the National Mall and not be inspired or in awe of where you are. Obviously, I wish there was less traffic, things like that. But just the experiences that we've had, and then also the proximity of so many other areas. So like we've been to a lot of Civil War battlefields, and we're close to New York City. There's just a lot of different areas that you can explore here, which has been really fun.
Yeah. We hope you have enjoyed hearing the behind the scenes scoop of our lives. If you want to know more, feel free to drop us a question in the comment section. Don't forget to subscribe to Engage with Eagle Forum and follow us on all social media platforms. To stay up to date with the latest news, check out eagleforum.org. From our house to the State House to the White House, this is Engage with Eagle Forum.